Hi, my name is John, and this is a look behind the scenes at the making of Peacemaker. Now, there will be some spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen Peacemaker by Doc Fell & Company, you probably want to pause this, check that out, and then come back so I don't ruin any surprises. So as I was kicking around ideas, one thing came to mind that has always inspired me, and that's been the music video for Hurt by Johnny Cash. What always stuck with me was that after Johnny Cash had passed, people started commenting on the video and saying how sad it was to see him in this state where he just looked feeble and weak and his hands were shaking. And I had listened to an interview with the director, and he was a little, I think, offended by it because he was saying that, like, no, Johnny Cash was acting on these scenes where it's like you see his hand shaking as he pours out this wine. He was hamming it up. And so I've always loved the idea of somebody using the tools they have to do this performance that could reach somebody that deeply, that people were looking at this video and thinking like, oh, look at the state he was in. And I love the idea that it's a performance and he did such an amazing job and you didn't know the difference. So using that as my launching point, I wanted to do something to get buy-in from the audience. I wanted people to emotionally invest in the character so they would stick along for the whole ride. Eventually that evolved into this premise where basically you've got a guy who you think is the good guy. The story plays out where he's going to rescue the damsel in distress, and at the end there's a hook where it's, oh, he's really the bad guy. At that point I started to do some research online to see if I could find anything that happened in the real world that I could pull from, and that's when I discovered Gerard John Schaefer. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail about it just because it's really dark stuff. Basically, back in the 70s, this guy would abduct women, keep them alive for a few days, and then kill them. But the really shocking part in his story was that he was actually a deputy in a small town, and his job was to protect the community. So if you think from every perspective how just crazy and psychotic that whole situation is, that this guy is driving around in a police car, abducting these women for years on end, and at the same time probably addressing the community's concerns and saying, no, don't worry about it, we're going to keep you safe. It's just really dark stuff. Another thing that I've always found fascinating is when an individual like a Ted Bundy is caught, as soon as it happens, the news stations will go to their neighbors and interview, and every time, nobody says like, oh, I knew something was going on, this guy was like evil and creepy. It's always like, no, he was nice and polite, I would have never guessed. But over time, after their actions become public knowledge, then you see where people do interviews with them. Later on, we'll say, oh my God, looking at this person, it was like looking in the eyes of the devil. And I'm not discounting that. It's just, if you look at the perception of somebody before they're caught, immediately after they're caught, and then years down the road, it's all contradictory. It's interesting. So it was extremely important that for the main character, I found the right person that could really pull off that performance, that the entire way through, there's nothing to suggest that he's the bad guy. And that's when I met James David Clark. And this guy is like a legit, real deal Old West cowboy. He is something else. I believe he's in his 60s and he still works today traveling all over doing something with agricultural consulting. And man, he's just tough as nails, but at the same time, like a good guy. And that good guy would make perfect for the villain I needed. James was so great to work with. He would just nail every performance, and if he didn't like a cut, he would tell me like, no, we're going to redo it and start over.
Action. That meant I wasn't happy with that.
The only issue I had with James was that before every single take, I had to keep coaching and tell him like, remember, you're soft, you're scared, you're weak, you're timid, because he would sit there with his hands on his hips, looking out the window confidently, because that's who the guy is. So we would have to do several takes to bring that down and eventually get where he's holding both of his arms, because we're trying to convey that idea that he's scared. So at any point in the video, if James pulls on your heartstrings and you think, oh my gosh, is he okay? Yeah, he's perfectly fine. He's tough as nails and he's a damn good actor. The opening scene was actually shot at a Airbnb in Springdale. I had rented a house for the night and came in at 6:00 p.m., set up all my equipment and staged the house, and then James showed up at 8 a.m. and then we started filming. In all of the scenes where you see the old documents that are faded and worn and the old photos, so to create all that content, I went on to archive.org, which hosts all kinds of content that's in the public domain. And so I downloaded just random documents from police reports and yearbooks. And to get that really aged look, I soaked all the printouts in a pan full of water and like 50 tea bags. After that, I took half the documents, hung them on a clothesline to dry, and the other half I put in my dryer so they get really brittle and get that aged look. Now the scene with the headphones is definitely one part where I failed. My original idea, he puts on the headphones to block out the sounds of people crying in the basement, and that's whenever he gets peaceful and relaxed. And so the idea was to dub in some crying or weeping. During the editing process, I tried several things and there was no way to pull it off. I think it was a little bit too complex of an idea to communicate in this tiny amount of time. So I didn't bother trying to get that point in. Now, for the scene with the news anchor, I was really fortunate to discover this guy on Fiverr, which is a freelance website. And for a few $100, you send him your script of what you need and he puts together this very realistic news story and sends back the files, and I was really happy with what he did. I felt that scene was important because it kind of communicates this sense of urgency that's not just happening in this guy's house, it's on a bigger scale. In this scene, I found out how much of a real cowboy James David Clark really is. I had to mount the camera on the hood of the truck and run cables to the back, and I was laying in the bed of the truck watching on a monitor and then talking to James over a CB and kind of directing him as we went. On that day of filming, James drove his work truck. So in the back, there's literally like cow manure, some leaky oil cans, some barbed wire. There's a dog blanket covered in hair. It's all things that you would find in a regular farm truck. It made things a little bit more interesting when filming, but it was still a lot of fun. So on the nature scenes where you see the fog or the subtle texture in the background, to pull that off, I just got an industrial bug sprayer and filled it up with mineral oil. That's how I got that look. I really wanted to convey the idea that the main character he's alone and he's lonely. So that's why in the first few scenes, I tried to make him look as small as possible. So when he leaves the house and he goes fishing, it's a little bit of a happy moment, but I still tried to do the shots where he still looked as tiny and alone as possible. So as he's fishing, we get our first look at the villain and damsel, played by Bradley Korblick and Anna Karen Pacheco. On that day of shooting, it was so hot outside, and I was miserable, but I can't even imagine how James felt. I had him running through the woods doing multiple takes. He was dressed in thick, long-sleeve clothing, and then to make it even worse, on several occasions I had to mist him down this concoction of baby oil and a few other things to get that beaded up sweat look, but the guy never complained once. So a huge thank you to him for everything he did to pull this off. So as he emerges from the tree line, he comes out and he sees Anna Karen there on the ground. Also, she was a really big help on this scene because I knew the emotion that we needed to convey and things we needed to get across, but I wasn't sure exactly how to do it. So we had to sit there for 10 or 15 minutes to kind of bounce ideas off of each other and talk it through how this should look. I mentioned before that it was hot on that day, but I'm pretty sure it was over 100 degrees. So on the scenes where Brad has a hold of her and he's shaking her around like a rag doll, we had to shoot that so many times to get just the right shot, and she was up for every single take. She just did an absolutely great job on this. And next we see Bradley make his entrance, and he also did a really good job. What's funny is in all the scenes he looks just angry and violent, and that's what we needed him to do. But when the camera wasn't rolling, the guy is so laid back. He's really easygoing, all smiles, nothing really gets him upset, and so it's kind of funny seeing the difference of him on camera and off. So after filming for almost 11 hours straight, this was the very last scene of the day. And everybody was tired and the sun was going down, so we had very limited time to pull this off. So we did a quick walkthrough with everybody to set the marks, and then we probably did 7 or 8 really fast takes back to back. So in the closing scene, we see the main character back at home resting, and you're kind of assuming that he's the hero that saved the day. And as he's getting up, we see another picture of the missing girl just to remind you of what she looks like. On this very last scene with James, this is the one take where we talked about it and we made sure we want him to look mean, menacing, intimidating. And so if you look at his body language, the way he's standing, he's much more like bold and confident, and we're trying to show that switch of character. And in the very last shot, as the camera pans down, we see Anna Karen and the missing girl, who was played by my girlfriend, chained up in the basement, letting you know that he was the bad guy all along. And that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. Thanks.